Hello everyone, this is John Bale speaking, and I would like to welcome you all to the first webinar in Thought Technology's new webinar series on mastering electrode application, how to apply EEG electrodes to ensure a good impedance. This is the first webinar that Thought Technology is running in our webinar series where we're trying to reach out to our client base to help them better record data or know about new options they have available in the biofeedback and neurofeedback realm. Some of you might recognize my voice if you are familiar with the Biofeedback Federation of Europe. I have only recently joined the Thought Technology family, so just in case you have questions about that, that is it. In today's session, I am hoping for this is going to be more of an interactive component such that you guys can ask questions as I go along through my PowerPoint and discuss how to get that good EEG electrode application method down. Now, if ever you have a question and you'd like to ask it to me at any time, you can just go to the GoToWebinar control panel. It's probably found at the upper right on your computer monitor, and you actually enter your question, your comment directly into the Questions tab. Alternatively, if you do want to actually verbally ask a question, you can also use the open hand icon that's found on the edge of the control panel. I would prefer questions because I'm only going to be looking back at it from time to time, and it does facilitate a sort of a quicker interaction based on the material I'll be looking at. For those of you that are paying attention, and I have looked at a list of your names, so a lot of you do know me, can you just type a quick little message saying hello or I can hear you inside the questions box? I just want to make sure that you all know where that questions box is, and then you can correctly interact with me. Hello from Bradford. Thank you very much. Okay, at least one person can hear me. Good, good. Hello, good audio. Thank you, Bob. All right, so it seems like at least a few people can hear me. Hello, Andrew, as well. So that's excellent. And like I said, I'm going to be looking back at this as I go. Oh, Claudia as well. Hi. And I'll make sure to answer your questions as they come, and hopefully this will help facilitate the learning process and the interaction between us. So, as the title of this webinar suggests, I'm going over how you put the electrodes on your client so that you can get that good impedance the first time and that you do not need to worry about problems when it comes to just having the client sit there, having to extend the session because you're just not getting the good impedance for there to be realistic neurofeedback information. One thing I will not be covering in today's session is the fact that I'm assuming you all can hook up the electrode cables to each other. Another way of talking about this is the montage. So I'm assuming that you've seen photos, you know where you want to place the reference or the ground and things like that, and I don't have to do an explanation of how to plug two channels of EEG together or something like that. We can always discuss that maybe in a future webinar if you have suggestions, but today we're really just focusing on that EEG electrode application. Just quick glancing back, oh, a bunch of people have clicked the open hand icons already. Geez, you all want to verbally speak? I will momentarily ignore you guys because we will come back to these verbal questions just in a moment because I do want to get going first. But thank you very much, Attila and Carlisle, for the open hand icons. If you accidentally click them just because you're testing it out, you can re-click it to lower your hand as well. Another quick word to everyone is that this is a recorded session, and so we will be sharing the recording with you, the live viewers, and it is possible that you as a viewer of the session are seeing it as a recording, so in which case you unfortunately cannot ask a question because obviously it's not live, it's a recording. But I hope you enjoy listening to my voice, and I hope you find this material useful as well. While I go through this presentation, I'm also going to be showing you guys a few videos because for you newbies out there and new to the neurofeedback world, it's always nice to see what it looks like when you apply the electrodes right in front of you. It's not as good as if it was a live demonstration where you can actually do the interaction and do the application yourself, but it's as good as we can do in terms of this internet and webinar format. So, first thing I want you to know when it comes to this EEG electrode application, and again, I'm assuming you guys attending here do not do this very often, even though some of you I know you do. It's important to remember that EEG electrode application, it's really an art. And I've had clinicians laugh at me when I say this, but it's something you practice and you get really good at with time, but it's not an easy, let's just show you how to do this in 30 seconds and bam, you're going to do it really well. It's something you need to practice, and as you continue to do it, you're going to realize that, oh, you have your method down packed, excellent, and that it's not something you worry about or you get nervous about at the beginning of a session when your client comes in anymore. If you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, children who owe you favors, or friends who you want to get back to them, maybe use these people as guinea pigs to practice the EEG application on them, because that's how you get good at it. You just do it. Personally, I can apply an EEG to my head. Actually, I can do 2 or 3 channels on my own head in a mirror in 5 minutes or less, just because I've practiced that before, as silly as it is. And so I'm perfectly comfortable doing this just because I've put the time in practicing putting the EEG on the head. It's just how it is. Everyone has a slightly different variation of technique, and so what I'm talking about today is what I've seen, what works for me and what works for the vast majority of clinicians I've spoken and interacted with in person. I've stolen some of their ideas and techniques and added to my own. If you're here and you already do EEG application, you might steal some of the suggestions I have here, and that's excellent. That's what I want you to do, because I want you to get better at this. But just know that perhaps a different individual you may speak to has a slightly different method for what I'm discussing today, and that's okay, as long as it gets that low impedance value. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that some people's scalps that you work on, they can easily get in good impedance, and others can really get you angry because you're just not getting that low impedance value using the same method that has worked well for you for many, many other individuals. That is just, it's just like that sometimes. Sometimes it's difficult to get that good impedance value, and just you have to try a little bit harder, apply a little more pressure, and just redo it. That's the best I can say. I have many clinicians who have agreed on this. Sometimes there's just a certain individual child, and you don't know why, but it's just hard to get that impedance on them even though you're using the same method. Just keep that in mind. Try to hold back your frustration. So what do we need to do a good electrode prep on the skin? Well, what's required of us, we definitely need some abrasive skin prepping gel. That's sort of sandy gel that lets you rub the skin, get away the dead skin cells in order to get a good conduction through. You also need the conductive paste, because that's what carries the signals through the electrodes that are placed on the person's earlobes or scalp or other parts of their skin. And I would definitely suggest having some tissue. Now, technically, it's supposed to be fiber-free tissue. I often use just normal tissue paper that you use to blow your nose, but you'd use tissue just to wipe away some sort of the excess skin prepping gel that sometimes gets placed too much on the skin surface, as well as sometimes a conductive paste if you have to redo the application process. Now, in terms of optional supplies that typically help, although are not required, I would suggest using cotton swabs. Personally, I like using cotton swabs for the skin prepping and applying the conductive paste, because that's useful to me. Other people use their fingers directly, and that's fine, but I just like using cotton swabs because I find it really helps the method. It also helps clean the electrodes later on, makes it a little bit faster. Alcohol wipes are also optional. Some people do like to wipe the skin surface clean before they apply the electrodes. It's not required. You don't need to use alcohol wipes in case you think their skin is too oily. That's not a problem either. But again, people like to do this and they find it helpful. I find alcohol wipes actually really useful in terms of getting excess conductive paste out of a person's hair after we're done the session, because it just easily dissolves in that, and that's great. Third suggestion are hair clips. Because we are placing electrodes on an individual's head, often hair gets in the way. We can't all be beautiful and bald. So having some hair clips just to part the hair aside, especially on women who have longer hair, is really, really useful. And it's a good thing to have just in your supply box. So before any skin prep has occurred, these are things you want to be aware of or have already done with the individual. So the individual who's coming into your clinic to get an assessment or a training session or something like that, they should be forewarned that you are going to be messing up their beautiful, beautiful hairstyle. This doesn't matter to some people, and that's fine because they don't care about a little bit of messy hair. Maybe they're going home after. But some other individuals who put a lot of work into their hair, whether it's men or women, they're equally get annoyed at this. You should let them know, because no one wants to put lots of effort and adding in lots of gel and other sort of cosmetic products into their hair if you're just going to ruin it. Letting them know that also stops them from putting that sort of hair gel in there and other products. And so it makes it easier for you to actually part their hair and get the site open and available. So let them know about that in advance of the session. Like with the suggestion I had on the previous page, If you have clips, use it to clip the hair out of the way if you're actually going to prep the site, because it makes it so much easier than having to part the hair with your hands over and over again. Next, already have your EEG equipment and cables plugged together. Now, this does not necessarily mean have the actual electrodes, either ear clips or the electrodes go on top of the head, plugged into the rest of it, but have all the other stuff ready, because you don't want to have to try to figure out how to, I don't know, connect two channels so they have linked ears reference after you've placed the electrodes on the person's head, hopefully with a good impedance, just because doing this at a later stage is just, it gets in the way and causes a little bit of confusion. Make sure, obviously, to measure out the 10, 20 sites of interest and to keep a copy of those values. So for those of you who might be new to neurofeedback, you always want to measure the certain statistics on the person's head, either from the Indian to the Asian, as well as between the ears, and then getting the correct percentages of distances for whichever EEG site of interest. Now, you have to do that beforehand, because if you don't do that, you might place the electrode at the incorrect location. And so I'm not going to go into the exact proportions and where you find each different site, because you can find that easily in a bunch of literature online and in a bunch of manuals. But make sure you measure that out before you prep the skin. Also, keeping just the values written down, like the exact measurements in centimeters or inches from what site, is really useful, because then you don't have to remeasure it another day of the same client. You can just check the numbers and then bam, go find that site quickly. An optional suggestion, and I've seen people do this and I thought it was really clever, is that once they actually measure out this 10-20 site, they often just mark the person's scalp, sometimes with like a little felt pen or a little marker, just so it notes it there. I know a few clinicians who actually, particularly on their male clients who tend to have shorter hair, they like to clip a certain section of hair, just, a few strands extra short, so it really marks it easily exactly where they're looking for, and that's a good reminder for them. Another optional one is to clean the site with alcohol wipe. For people who are fearful of transferring infections or something like that, you can use the alcohol wipe on that, and that's fine. Oftentimes, it just suggests cleaning the electrodes afterwards, but again, this is an optional choice for you. I actually see that someone's already raised their hand right now, so Attila, I'm actually going to unmute you quite briefly, and if you'd like to verbally ask your question, you can do so right now. Attila, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi. So actually, I have one question, which was on your proposal using the hair clips. Mm-hmm. And the question is, it can be a metal one, or it should be a plastic one?
Metal can be fine. Obviously, you don't want the hair clip touching the electrode, but you don't want anything touching the electrode. The photo I took was purely because it was the easiest photo I found on Google. So using a plastic is probably fine as well. Just make sure that the clips themselves, whether it's metal or plastic, do not touch the electrode itself or the wiring. Okay?
Okay, good. Thanks.
Thanks. All right. So a quick glance. Oh, no other questions. I'm going to keep going from there. Attila, you just raised your hand again. Attila, do you have another question, or was that an accident? Oh, there you go. She dropped her hand. All right, there you go. We always get to call out people and embarrass them if they click the wrong button accidentally. It's okay. So if we keep going, first part, once you've located the actual EEG site you want and you've done that preparation stuff, obviously we're going to apply some of the skin prepping gel to your finger or cotton swab, and then we're going to rub the site. Just so you know, in a moment I'm going to show a video, so don't worry about trying to imagine this in your own head. Something that people don't do very often is use force, and you definitely want to use force, and I'll describe this more in a moment. And don't worry about some of the hair that you might be rubbing over. Obviously, most people have hair on their head, and there's always a few strands that are exactly at that site, and you can just rub against that. Don't worry about it. And once you're done that, wipe away the excess gel. So what does it look like? I actually have two videos running here. The top one is where you put the skin prepping gel directly on your finger to rub, and the other one is with the cotton swab. I mean, it looks almost exactly the same, and they mostly run in time. So this is me opening the skin prepping gel, putting a dab on the cotton swab or my finger. It doesn't have to be too much, it doesn't have to be too little. This is nice examples of what it might look like. And then here's my lucky guinea pig who had no choice but to allow me to do this to him. And so I just grab the earlobe in this example and I start rubbing it. And I make sure to hold it with my other hand so I can apply force. Now, what do I mean by force? Well, everyone likes to, when they're doing this for the very first time, they're not sure how much force they want to apply to the individual. Everyone wants to be gentle and nice, and I would suggest not to be gentle and nice. We're not trying to give little angel kisses of being light on their skin. You actually have to really wipe away those dead skin cells. And so what I'm going to suggest is that just really push down or have your finger on the opposite side of this earlobe, an example, and apply some force. A clinician once told me a funny story of he knows he's going to get a good impedance when he makes the client's skin bleed. Now, don't actually do that. Don't do that. But that's an example of how much force he's putting in. And so on the first times you try this on your unlucky family member or very lucky family member, just apply more force than you think would be necessary, because you're going to realize if you put a lot of force, you get a good impedance, then maybe you can try to, relax back from there. I'm going to just let these play one more time just to see it again. Now, there is not always excess abrasive paste left over, or gel, should I say, after the skin prepping or skin rubbing process. But if there is a little bit much, you can just wipe away with the tissue paper. I often find that this gel actually evaporates on its own rather rapidly, and so if there's only a little bit left, I'm not going to worry about it. But in these two little video examples you see right here, I actually do wipe it away with some tissue. Let's just wait for this to run to the completion. There we go. All right. So same little application process, but instead on someone's scalp. I'm sort of parting the hair apart with my fingers. I've already located my EEG site. And then either using the cotton swab, where I can be very focused, or with my finger, I'm rubbing down on their head. Now notice I am rubbing over some of the hairs, and that's just normal. You can't be perfect. But be sure to push down. Use that force like I said. I taught someone just yesterday, and her first guinea pig was her colleague, and he thought she was trying to bore a hole into his head. So obviously that's too hard. But you want to apply that force, because then you realize how to get good impedance by being a little bit more forceful, and then being lighter later on once you know you can do it well when you're a little bit more forceful. One clinician, that's not written down here, but he actually had a little clever add-on that he did here, is that once he was done prepping the site with the skin abrasive, he actually used a little cotton swab, like the one video below. He would often have the other cotton swab, just the tiniest amount of conductive paste, and then he'd just put a dot directly on the site he wants to keep his focus on. So when he moved his hands away, or when his eyes looked away to get the other supplies, he knew that the dot still remained there, so that's exactly the site he's aiming for when he's actually going to be applying the electrodes. So that's another little tip. Again, as we're going, feel free to throw in any questions you might have, because I'm still looking over that as we go. So when it comes to the conductive paste, the actual second step, we first off put that conductive paste and we scoop it onto whatever electrode we're going for. In this example right here, I'm using my finger to apply some conductive paste to one of the ear clips. And I'm just wiping it on there and getting a nice good gob. Here in the next part of this video, you're actually seeing me using the electrode cup that's going to the top of the head. And I'm just scooping out a whole bunch of electrode paste. And I'm really putting an excess amount in there. Now, a popular question is, how much paste do we want to use? Just so you know, this video is going to be continuously repeating, so you can keep watching it. So how much paste do we want to actually use in terms of this conductive stuff? Well, when it comes to the ear clip, we want to cover the whole metal circular part of the ear clip. For normal neurofeedback recording, so if you're recording standard bands, if you're doing Z-scores, something like that, I don't actually worry so much about covering the whole metal part of that actual ear clip. If you are doing slow cortical potential recordings, you have a slightly different electrode. You want to make sure to have every part of that metal surface that's going to be applied to the surface of the individual skin. It has to be covered in conductive paste. Just because slow cortical potentials are so sensitive and so time component required, that you need extremely low impedance, and you have to have like perfect no chance of getting any sort of tiny amounts of interference in there. So for slow cortical potentials, it's extremely important to have that electrode part covered. For normal neurofeedback, it's less important, but again, you still want it in there. In terms of the active electrode cup, that sort of scoop that's being shown in the video right now, you really want to scoop up enough conductive paste so it's really like an ice cream cone, if you imagine. Like there's that excess coming out of one end just piled up there. Because when we end up pushing against the skin, we actually want that layer to stay in between. I'm right now showing a video of me applying the electrodes to an individual's head. So you saw the ear clip right there, and then we're going to see the electrode cup placed on top. This again is also a repeating video. This might seem silly and obvious, but some people make this mistake. For the ear, for the earlobe, when you do abrade the skin with that rough paste first, and then you place the ear clip on it afterwards, make sure the metal part of the ear clip or the side with the conductive paste is in fact touching the side of the ear that you did the abrasive rubbing on. Putting it on the opposite side is obviously not useful, but sometimes people make that mistake. When it comes to the actual electrode cup on the top of the head, when you're pushing the electrode cup down, make sure that some of the conductive paste, assuming you have a large amount like that ice cream scoop, make sure some of the electrode conductive paste pops out of the hole at the top, so sort of flows out. I mean, you can flow it a lot, a few centimeters, half an inch. That's okay if you have enough conductive paste. But just know that we want that excess there, making that nice little layer around the electrode and a little bit coming out top. One thing that people tend to make a mistake of is that they think the actual metal of the electrode cup or the electrode ear clip is supposed to directly touch the skin itself. Even when I talk about it, I'm saying make sure the metal surface is touching the correct side of the skin. And the reality is that the actual metal of the electrodes should not be directly touching the skin. I know it's sort of odd. Think of it more like this, where the conductive paste they're using is the meat in a sandwich, and that keeps apart the two pieces of bread. So the two pieces of bread are never touching, or at least in a nice sandwich where there's lots of stuff inside. The metal of the electrode and the actual skin surface is like those two pieces of bread. And so we don't want the metal and the skin to ever touch, but they're touching via the paste, and that paste is the delicious middle layer of the sandwich that we always want to be nice and ample and not very thin and barely there holding the two pieces of bread apart. People, when they initially place the electrode the first time, they often push the electrode so far or hard into the skin that when they let go, a lot of the paste has been pushed aside, and then the skin reverbs and sort of pushes back away on the electrode, and it sort of detaches a little bit, pretty much guaranteeing you're not going to get a good impedance value. So remember, you really want that sandwich conductive paste layer between the metal and the skin surface. I also hope you enjoy this photo. I clearly do not have very much artistic ability. All right, so maybe I should have mentioned handling cables at the beginning, but I really wanted to focus on the whole electrode application stuff, so I was happy to leave this towards afterwards. When you're applying the electrodes to the individual, we want to make sure to orient the cables such that they are actually going behind the subject, so the subject does not see the cables in front of their face. This is vastly important because if the cables are in their face, they're only going to be looking at the cables and they want to swat them out of the way. It's going to distract from whatever sort of neurofeedback assessment or training session that you're going to be running. And if they're going to try to swat it out of the way, a chance is that they might hook the cable itself, and that's going to pull it, and that'll dislodge the actual electrode itself. So that's really, really important. Now, for one channel of EEG, or using one sensor like it's shown in this photo, it looks nice and clean and easy. I know for some people, if you're doing 2 channels of training or 4, there's a lot of cables. And so one of the other useful things is actually you can just get a little cable pouch. We put all that stuff in there, and then out of the pouch is just the active electrodes and the references and grounds. And that's a really good way of being able to organize those cables so it's not as confusing for you, especially when you're doing the prep to place the electrodes on someone's head or take them off. Oftentimes, clinicians who use this sort of pouch idea, they just pretty much attach the pouch on the back of the chair that they use with the subjects, and so it just rests there all the time, and it's fine. If you ever want to remove the cables, you can just unplug the end of the electrode cable from the DIN connector. The DIN connector is where it's the three different colored cables connect into one cable and then plug into the sensor. So they just disconnect it from that, and then they do the washing, cleanup, or checking, whatever, what have you. So what happens if the impedance is bad? Well, once you go into your recording system and you actually initiate the impedance check, which I'm not going to talk about, you guys should know how to do that, or it's written down in the manual, it's possible that impedance check is too high. Typically, if it's above 5, that's considered too high. We usually want it below 5. If you're doing research, you typically want it 2 or lower. If your impedance just happens to be ever so slightly too high, as this video is suggesting, oftentimes if you just poke the electrode a little bit and just applies a tiny bit of pressure pushing it down, it sometimes makes that clear difference in nice 0.5 kiloohms. You need to get it below the 5 mark, or the 2 mark. And so it's silly, but this is a nice, easy way where you might be able to get it good. You can watch the impedance values as it goes down and goes back up. And so that's a nice little method. Otherwise, if the impedance doesn't go to the correct values, then you should remove the electrode. you should clean the site of any conductive paste, and then you should redo from that skin prepping stage where you rub the skin. It's annoying. No one wants to do that, but it's necessary in order to get a good low impedance once more. A quick question here is that if your impedance, this is a little photo stolen from the impedance check window, if your impedance actually says open, it's two things. Either your whole prepping process was so atrocious that the impedance is so high it's not even worth showing as a number, or more likely, one of the electrode cables has fallen off the head, or again, more likely, the actual cables, how you've plugged them in together, so your whole cable setup for the 1 or 2 channels or 4 channels of EEG, there might be one of the electrodes or one of the cables not correctly plugged into it. So I'd suggest if it says open and an electrode is not clearly hanging off the person's head, to first check the cable connections and then maybe remove the electrode. Now, as an aside, impedance, interestingly, does decrease, so it goes to a lower value, which is good, over time as some of the paste, and especially the skin prepping gel, evaporate. That does not mean that you should place the electrodes on someone's head and then wait an hour to actually initiate a session. That's not good because there's a chance that a sort of charge builds up, especially when it's sitting there. And also, who really wants to actually place the electrodes on someone's head and wait a full hour? That's a little bit annoying for you and for the client. So, cleaning up. Cleaning electrodes is not so difficult. Typically, just some warm water flowing over it and a little bit of rubbing cleans them off. Personally, if I'm done a session with a client, I like to just take the 3 electrodes, dunk them in some warm water, and then I'll come back to them in 10 minutes because the paste starts melting off in that warm cup. Otherwise, you can do like this little video suggests, just go to the warm water and then place them on a piece of tissue paper to get that water off. If you're going to disinfect, use normal disinfectant. It's fine, everyday stuff. Something to not do would be leave the electrodes in some water for hours and hours and hours. Now, because this is metal and the electrodes are silver or gold plated, over time, if you leave in water for a long, long time, it's slowly going to corrode and actually technically leach off the metals that allow for a good conduction of a signal. Now, that happens over time. But it's just something to avoid. So like, don't put your electrodes in a cup overnight in case it's your last session of the day and you're really tired. Like, I know it's annoying, but maybe just pass the warm water on them to get that paste off. As suggested, apply disinfectant. And when it comes to actually the client themselves, you can use those alcohol wipes to help get rid of some of the paste from their hair. That's always helpful, and it's really, really useful. So they'll enjoy that. You'll think it's easier as well. Of course, you can use the alcohol wipes on the electrodes themselves, but to get every little bit off, it's usually just easier with warm water. So, some additional tips for you guys. I've gone over the whole electrode process right there. I've hopefully made it seem easy, but that's how it's typically done, and that's typically the good advice I give people. Something to keep in mind is that just because someone has short hair or no hair, it does not necessarily mean you're going to have an easier time getting impedance just because you don't have to, push that hair out of the way and stuff like that. People with very short hair, like think, very short buzz cuts or no hair because they just have not had hair for 10, 20, 30 years. The scalp of their skin tends to actually thicken, and due to weathering, from sun exposure, rubbing their head, direct contact with a hat, it tends to make a thicker layer of that dense skin cells. So you oftentimes have to rub a little bit better, or you're going to have a harder time getting that low impedance with them. It's just the way that it is. And so you just have to try a little bit more, apply more pressure with these types of individuals. Don't forget that, as I said at the very beginning, sometimes people just have a hard time getting good impedance with them because, maybe they have a thicker layer of that dead skin cells. And it's just the way that it is. When first learning or to do this process, so if you have never applied electrodes to someone and you're really doing this for the first time, I would suggest starting with the earlobes and those ear clips because it's much easier to do that because the hair isn't in the way than doing an actual active EEG electrode site on top of the scalp. So start with the earlobes and then move on to the scalp and then go from there. But it's typically much, much easier to get an impedance with the earlobes because it's just out there than with top of the head. If possible as well, avoid scarred regions. This stands true pretty much for the ears. If an individual has earrings in there, just the ear piercing, have the earring there for the many years they may have had it, you want to typically avoid those regions themselves. If the person has earrings in, you think it might bang against the electrode clip that's adjacent to it, you might want to have them take out the earrings. Typically, if you can't do the earlobe, you can actually move up along the side of the ear to some of the cartilage area, and that's just as good for getting a good low impedance on a recording side over there. The way that youth culture is, it's getting more popular for people to also have, I believe it's called gauges. It's where it's not a normal earring, but it's sort of, I guess, a little sort of thick circle earring, which stretches the earlobe out, so it's actually like a large hole there. People who have gauges, well, you can't really use their earlobe because it has pretty much ceased to exist because it's just stretching a tiny little flap of skin out. So again, you want to move up the side towards the more cartilage area because that small little flappy skin is not particularly useful for getting for electrode application at all, but also getting a useful impedance. This whole electrode application process, I know if you're a beginner it seems daunting, but when you're used to doing it, it really can be easily integrated into the 55-minute or 1-hour client session. Typically applying the electrodes on someone where you know where you want to apply the electrodes and you already have the cables hooked up, it takes 5 minutes. It's really easy. Integrate into a normal session, so if you're doing 30-something training sessions on neurofeedback with an individual, you have them come in, shake their hand, ask how the day was going, just have them sit down immediately and you can just start prepping their head as you're discussing maybe what's been going on in the last few days, maybe how they felt for the last few interventions or protocols that you've been doing with them. And so you can speak to them while doing the electrode application process and it works perfectly. For clients who are actually used to the electrode application, so like they've seen you do it a few times on them, if you're using their ears as reference or grounds, you can actually give the abrasive paste, the sandy paste, and put it on their fingers so they rub their own earlobes. And so they help you out doing that because, I mean, they know they can press really hard and they've seen you and felt you do it before. So that's a good way of getting them to help you along and integrate it into the process to make it go a little bit faster. Obviously, they're not going to do the conductive paste application, but they can help with the first step where you're just sort of rubbing that skin. All right, so this is actually a very quick webinar session. I'm surprised, not a lot of questions are coming in. I'm assuming that my descriptions are absolutely spectacular and wonderful and that you're all definitely understanding where to go from here when it comes to applying the electrodes. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to write them into the questions box right now or use the raise hand icon. I'm happy to answer those. I'll give you guys a moment to type anything you might have in there. As a quick reminder to you, Thought Technology does do many online courses, and so if you're looking for any more instruction on neurofeedback tools, whether it be Z-score or standard neurofeedback, slow cortical potentials, or other more specialized things, Thought Technology definitely loves to arrange those type of sessions. There's also various providers out there who do additional education. Obviously, Biofeedback Federation of Europe, where I came from, is one of them, and so you can check out those different resources. Oh, there you go. Someone has just thrown in a question right there. Let's see. Hello, Claudia. What other situations can affect impedance, weather, stress, static? Interestingly enough, I mean, not so much impedance, but EEG recordings themselves. Getting a good impedance doesn't get affected much by, I guess, environment. Now, the actual EEG recording itself does get affected by other what's the word that I'm looking for? Other magnetic sources or electromagnetic sources like, microwaves or large machinery. But for an impedance, it's really just the measure of electrical conduction from the electrode through your skin and those neurons getting it to it. So there's not much that affects just the measure of good contact between the electrode and the skin. I suppose if someone had a metal plate in their head, you can get a very odd impedance, maybe quite low for that EEG site, but then if you're trying to do EEG training through a metal plate, then I think you're being a little bit silly because that's not going to be effective. And so weather and stress wouldn't really affect that. I don't think static would either, although you'd get sort of an odd electrical signal with static, not in terms of impedance, but with the normal neurofeedback recording. Gosm has a question. John, many thanks for the webinar. Can you have a copy of the PowerPoint for your team? Sure, I can send you a copy, Gosm. No problem. I'll do that afterwards by email. All right, question from Michael. How often should one disconnect all the wires to avoid, I forget the term, I think you mean like holding up a static charge. Honestly, the majority of clinicians I know really never disconnect the wires unless, they're going from one channel of EEG to two or something like that. And so they're happy to keep it like that. It's oddly enough more important to sometimes disconnect the EEG sensor from the encoder box. And so that's not something I would really worry about. When you go to record neurofeedback session, once the impedance is done, you can tell if the system is holding a charge anyways, just so you can look at the raw EEG wave. It's going to show up there. It's going to look clearly odd because the signal will not be floating around the zero mark. It'll be flowing at a higher or lower level. Question from Bob. Any chance you can talk about impedance checking? Having problems with Infinity encoder? Not impedance. Bob, if there's a problem with your encoder box, the actual equipment getting into impedance check mode, I think that might be a good question for tech support. Thought Technology Tech Support, they'd be happy to help you out. You can call anytime during the day. I'll send you a message after this so you can get that looked into. Just because if your system cannot enter in impedance check mode, then that's a different issue from the electrode application process and stuff like that. I'll pass on a word, Bob, to the right individual. Hello, Maria. What do you do if impedance check doesn't work? Well, if you cannot enter impedance check mode, then there's a problem, well, obviously, with the encoder and equipment, or there's a problem with a certain method. It depends on what encoder you use. People with Procom 5s, Procom Infinities, they typically have a pretty easy time getting the impedance check mode. There's a little trick with the Procom 2. You're supposed to unplug the cable and replug it in to initiate that impedance check in the B input. But if you cannot get in there, then that is definitely a good question for tech support, and I would suggest calling. We're always happy to help with that. Where can you buy some 1020 paste in Canada, Andrew? If I recall, you can look on Thought Technology website. However, there's always several dealers for 1020 paste. They tend to have a pretty wide coverage. And so I can send you some more information about that if I just go make a quick check online afterwards. I'll send you a contact about that, Andrew. Can I talk about minimizing cable sway? Excellent question, Sarah. So cable sway in the sense, the cables are moving back and forth and you don't want them to move electrodes. Typically, when you're using the amount of conductive paste that's suggested, that nice ice cream scoop, that holds on to the electrode quite well, and so it stops the cable from really being able to pull on the electrode to make it fall off or something like that. That being said, the EEG sensors, where you plug the three little cables into that DIN cable that plugs into it, they themselves have a sort of clip, and so you can clip it onto the back of the individual shirt or a chair, and so that helps to hold some of the weight, and it avoids that type of problem by transferring the weight to the sensor itself, and so the electrodes themselves should have an easy time. If the electrode sway really is affecting it, you might want to use a little bit more conductive paste, because the conductive paste, aside from being a good conductor, it's meant to be goopy. Goopy is my technical term for that high viscosity, or being very viscous and thick. The goopiness is helping to hold the electrode there in place as well, and to avoid any sort of weight of it falling off or something like that. Oh man, we're just throwing questions at me. I like this. Hello from Sarush. Is there any way to check the impedance of electrodes like a QEEG? QEEG is a different method because you have an electrode cap placed on top of the individual, and even the electrode application process is a little bit odd. There's a needle, I guess I can call it a needle. It's not penetrating the skin, but a needle-like thing that goes into each hold, and you tend to oftentimes you prep the skin and you overwhelm it with conductive paste. Now, I call it overwhelming just because if you've ever had a QEEG run on you with a QEEG hat, it seems like it's a lot of paste. But that impedance check method is a little bit different. I mean different in the sense because our software equipment doesn't do the full cap QEEG, and doing impedance check with QEEG is probably very particular to each different system that you're using. So unfortunately, it's not quite something I can answer in terms of the question. Do wireless tools influence the EEG? Attila, yes, they do. Not in terms of the impedance check so much, but in terms of the actual neural feedback recording, the data that you are collecting, yes. Reality is that the maybe millions of neurons that we're trying to collect readings from are deeply insulated below many membranes and a lot of skin and skulls and protective layers inside the head. And the signal that we do collect is quite weak compared to perhaps some other signals that might be around the environment. If you were to run a microwave next to someone's head when you're doing EEG recording, you're going to notice that the EEG recording might not be very good because the signal is going to look like it's going crazy. Smartphones typically can be turned off around an individual. I actually often enough don't turn my cell phone off and actually find it doesn't cause much an issue. But that's something to keep in mind. What else? Large medical equipment especially, but also just large equipment in general that might have a high electromagnetic signal. So if you are seeing weird signals collected from your neurofeedback equipment and you work in a large apartment building, maybe check who your neighbors are above and below and on the sides in case there's that sort of influence. But yes, environment does affect it. Andrew, okay, I will get back to you exactly on the location where you can buy some 1020 paste, because it's really not difficult. Clinicians I know in Montreal buy large containers of it that make you think that they might actually expire before they use it all, but the amount of paste they use really does impress one. Claudia, I had a really hard time, so I started using neurofeedback from Dr. Diane. Are wet electrodes better to use paste? Do they have the same recording? Wet electrodes, I guess you're comparing versus dry electrodes. Typically, dry electrodes have a really hard time getting a good impedance. I know thought technology engineers have been playing around with dry electrodes. There's some versions that most people have not seen, but the wet electrodes are much better for getting an impedance. It's just, as it suggests, it's wet, it's goopy, and people have to learn how to do it properly. But the impedance check versions for that are far superior than any sort of dry electrode example. Another question from Gazam. Sometimes we have low amplitude in raw EEG. What's the reason, you think? Actually, different brains, this is really diverting away if we have some time. Different brains have different general amplitude profiles. So some people have what we call a low amplitude profile. It's just their whole brain tends to just have low amplitudes. Alternatively, some people have very high amplitude profiles. You can see all the different bandwidths have proportionally higher amplitudes. That being said, maybe just the many insulation layers are a little bit thinner, and so we have an easier time picking up the electrical signals, so it looks like it just has a higher amplitude. Similarly, maybe their protective layers between the brain and the actual electrode are a little bit thicker in some people. It seems like it's just lower amplitude. These are normal variations, and so it's not something to worry about or consider unusual. It's just a lot of people tend to have what I guess an average amplitude level, and sometimes it's different. I use a Waterpik to clean the electrode. It works very fast. A Waterpik. I actually really like using the Q-tips to clean the electrodes after they've been used. So especially in the electrode cup, sometimes you have that leftover paste that's in the sort of the caved-in region. I like to take the Q-tip, or sorry, I should use the general word, the cotton stick, and just sort of scoop it out. I find that really easy and a fast way of getting that electrode paste out of there, personally. But thank you for the suggestion, Bob. I can see there's another little hand up, and that is coming from Maria. All right, Maria, I'm going to unmute you, and would you like to ask your question? Ooh, Maria, I think you actually muted yourself on that one. So I've unmuted you, but you're keeping yourself muted, so unfortunately we can't hear you if you're speaking. I'm just going to go ahead and remute you because I don't think we're going to sit around and wait for that. I'm sorry, Maria, if you'd like to write in your question, you can do so. All right, I'll give everyone just one more moment to send in those questions. I really like the questions you had there. That was fun. That was good. I like it when it tests my knowledge and I get to talk. Clearly, I enjoy listening to myself, and I hope I get to do more of these webinars during the webinar series that Thought Technology is running this next year. Be sure, while I'm still waiting for questions, be sure to check in with Thought Technology's social media and the messages we send out in the user groups, because we have new complimentary webinars running each month. The next one will be held in, I believe it's mid-September, and it's going to be on the slow cortical potential suite. And then one following that is going to be on a surface electromyography, or EMG tools, and that's tied together with a complimentary webinar being provided by the Biofeedback Federation of Europe, which you can also sign up for on their website. All right, one more question from Claudia. Thanks, John. Very illustrative webinar. A few additional questions. What is the right client position? Okay, so the correct client position for neurofeedback sessions where the individual has to actually look at the computer screen would be just them sitting upright comfortably. You want to have a relaxed neck, obviously, because the neck's really tense. It's probably going to get some other muscles to be tense, and that's going to maybe introduce some artifacts into the signal. If the client is not supposed to look at the computer screen, perhaps you're doing assessment where you don't want them seeing any feedback, then again, sitting relaxed and just having their eyes facing a little bit downward. And if it's a type of session that's more therapeutic where they're actually lying back, well, in that case, you have them in sort of reclined chair, relaxed. Although make sure that their head is not going to be rubbing against any of the active electrodes because that's going to knock it right out of place. Should they be sitting in a chair or on a couch? Honestly, whichever's comfortable for them and lets them like sit there comfortably and do whatever the session is with you, then that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that if they're sitting in a couch, it's not one where, or just make sure that the couch or the chair itself doesn't have too high of a back where they might, lean their head back to rest it on the chair and thereby, knock the electrodes or stuff like that. Or at least they're prepped not to lean back like that and knock the electrodes away. Should the encoder be placed on the right or the left of the client? Honestly, that's just a question up to you and your setup. It depends where the encoder is if you want to place it with the individual. Some people actually have the client hold the encoder box, so it's closer to them, so there's less chance of the electrode cables are going to be yanked on. Alternatively, if you have the electrode box on the table, well, whichever way, it's just easier to give access for the electrode cables to come from the back of their head and be placed on top of their head. These are just questions up to you. Clinicians who have dual monitor screens, maybe they have their own clinician's computer at one side, and you probably want to have the encoder on that side, whereas the other side has the monitor meant only for the client. I think these are just to play around with and exactly figure out your own setup. What's key is just making sure that the individual sitting there relaxed. They don't want to move their head too much. They don't want to tense their necks too much, and so they can facilitate nice, good, clean data recording for you during your session. All right, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, so I think it's about time to bring this session to an end. I'd really like to thank everyone who attended, and as a quick reminder, this is going to be recorded in case you want to come back to it. I hope you understand. I hope you understood what I was saying. I realize when I get excited and passionate, I tend to speak a little bit quicker, so I apologize for that if I was going a little too fast for you guys. And I look forward to doing more webinars with you all, and I look forward to all of you attending Thought Technologies' continuing webinar series for the rest of this year and beyond. So thank you very much, everyone, on behalf of Thought Technology for attending this session, and we hope to see you sometime soon. All right? Have a good day.